Hi everyone! Today's lecture is another lecture on a topic that you already know about, so this will just be a little more information, a little more in-depth practice with something you've done before, which is comparative adjectives or the сравнительная степень. The comparative is the form prettier, taller, older, younger, closer, farther, all that kind of stuff. In Russian, it can be formed by adding ye or ye in conversational speech to the adjective stem. So, for example, скорее or скорей, meaning sooner or quicker. Other examples would be холоднее, сильнее, труднее, важнее, теплее, красивее, серьезнее. Note that all of those examples I just gave had stems ending in n or v or or l. Adjectives with velar and husher stems or with ta or de, so certain dental stems, will have a different formation that we'll go over later. Also, please note the stress shift in a lot of the comparative forms like холоднее, сильнее, труднее. The stress shifts are the norm in comparative forms, so assume that there's a stress shift unless there isn't one. On page 268, you can see a list of adjectives that do not have a stress shift in the comparative form. The rule, in case you're interested, is if there's a stress shift in the short form, there's normally a stress shift in the comparative form, but that only works if you know the stress of the short form. In general, just assume that there is a stress shift, especially in shorter adjectives. What I just told you about forming the comparative by adding ye to the stem is only for the simple comparative. And the simple comparative can only be used for the predicate, so when something is something, and can only be in the nominative. So for example, we could say, лето теплее, чем зима. Summer is warmer than winter. We're saying something is something, so we have a predicate, and we can use this simple comparative. You can also use the compound comparative in the same situation. So you could say, for example, лето более теплое, чем зима. But you must use the compound comparative to modify a noun that is not in the nominative, so a noun that is an object rather than a subject. To form the compound comparative, we add более, which never declines, to the adjective which will decline. So, for example, я хочу жить в более красивом городе, or я читаю более длинную книгу. So note that we have, in both cases, более, which does not decline, and then we put our actual adjective in the correct case. So в более красивом in the prepositional, более длинную in the accusative. If you want to say that something is less some adjective than something, you have the same formation but with менее. So менее plus the adjective in any case. So for example, я хочу жить в менее теплом климате. Я хочу читать менее длинную книгу. Or you could say, эта книга менее длинная, чем та книга. That book is less long than the other book. So you can use it for the predicate and for any case that you need. There are two methods for forming the actual comparative construction, the entire comparative phrase. The first one is to have the comparative plus чем plus the thing that's being compared in the nominative. So we could say, for example, «Война и мир длиннее, чем Анна Karenina». War and peace is longer than Anna Karenina. Note that we have a comma between длиннее and чем. Those two clauses must be set off by a comma. The other method is the comparative and then just the genitive of the thing being compared. So, for example, «Война и мир длиннее Анны Карениной». War and peace is longer than Anna Karenina. They have exactly the same meaning, it's just two different forms of saying the same thing. As I told you, the construction of making comparatives by adding ye to the adjectival stem is only for some comparatives. Some comparatives are formed from a completely different stem than their adjective or their adverb. So if you look at page 269, you'll see a box, a table at the bottom of the page, and it has a short list of comparatives that are made from a different stem than their adjective or their adverb. For example, плохой, bad, becomes хуже, worse, And хороший, good, becomes лучше, better. On the next page, on page 70, you'll see a list of adjectives with consonant mutation in the comparative. Just like verbs whose stems end in k or t or d or z will have consonant mutation, so will adjectives when you add the comparative ending. The mutations are exactly the same as they are with verbs. Z, g, d become zh. For example, дорогой, дороже, молодой, моложе. K and T become ch. So богатый becomes богаче. Жаркий becomes жарче. S and H become sh. So тихий becomes тише. Высокий becomes выше. Note that we lose the o. And s, t together become sha with a tail. Простой becomes проще. Частый becomes чаще. Another thing to note about this is that these forms do not have end stress. While the ye ending tends to take an end stress, adjectives with mutations do not take an end stress. There is also a list on the bottom of page 70 of unpredictable mutations and changes. For example, поздний becoming позже, старый старше, дешевый дешевле. Another thing to take note of is that when talking about age, we use mladsze for discussing the age of siblings, but моложе for discussing other types of age. And we use starsze for discussing the age of people, or comparing the age of people, but более старый for comparing the ages of anything else.